Liberal reporter attacks Melania Trump. Donald Trump response leaves him humiliated, all waiting for their chance to throw a question at the man standing at the podium. Donald Trump, unshaken as always, stood tall, adjusting the microphone as he prepared to take the next question. Then, from the middle of the crowd, a voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Trump, many say Melania is just a trophy wife, that she lacks intelligence and influence. What do you say to that?" The energy in the room shifted. The usual buzzing of journalists faded as the question hung in the air. A few reporters exchanged quick glances. This wasn't just a question. It was a trap, carefully crafted to insult, to provoke, to humiliate. Trump's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch, didn't look angry, but something in his eyes sharpened. The reporter, a well-known critic, smirked slightly, waiting. He expected Trump to react defensively, to stumble over his words, to get angry. But instead, Trump simply tilted his head, let out a small chuckle, and leaned into the mic. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice steady, powerful. "You're questioning my wife's intelligence?" The smirk on the reporter's face faltered just a little. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. And what happened next? No one was prepared for it. For years, Melania Trump had been the target of harsh scrutiny from the media. From the moment she stepped into the public eye as the wife of Donald Trump, the media seemed determined to define her by everything but her own accomplishments. Her accent was mocked, her fashion choices were scrutinized, and there was constant speculation about her role as First Lady. The press portrayed Melania as cold, aloof, and detached, often focusing more on her appearance than her work. Critics accused her of being a mere figurehead, a trophy wife who had no real influence or purpose. They claimed that she was out of touch, disconnected from the American people, and only in the White House because of her marriage. But Melania's story was far more than the media made it out to be. She wasn't just a model who married a businessman. She was a woman of substance, a woman who had dedicated her life to helping others long before her husband became president. Melania spoke 5 languages. She worked as a successful businesswoman, ran a luxury jewelry line, and even launched her own charitable initiatives long before the media decided to label her. But those facts never seemed to make the headlines. Instead, the media focused on her appearance, her supposed lack of involvement in her husband's political campaigns, and her occasional missteps. It wasn't just the media's inaccurate portrayals of her that stung. It was the double standard she faced. When other First Ladies took on major roles in the public eye, they were praised for their activism, their diplomacy, and their dedication to causes. Yet Melania, who worked on her own anti-bullying campaign, Be Best, and visited hospitals and military bases, was often dismissed as uninterested or uninvolved. Her Be Best initiative, aimed at helping children stay safe online and promoting kindness, was mocked by the press as nothing more than a PR stunt. They dismissed her efforts, saying she wasn't serious, while ignoring the significant strides she made to champion children's welfare. The media didn't just ignore her accomplishments. They regularly attacked her with a ruthless venom, questioning her motives, her past, and even her immigration status. It seemed as though there was no line they wouldn't cross to undermine her. But throughout all of this, Melania remained stoic, calm, and dignified. She didn't engage with the media's attacks, didn't lash out. Instead, she chose to continue her work quietly, behind the scenes, focusing on what mattered to her. Donald Trump had always been a staunch defender of his wife. He often spoke about how unfairly she was treated by the media, how the press was willing to go to any lengths to tear her down simply because of who she was and who she married. And so, when the Liberal reporter at the press conference decided to ask that question about Melania, it wasn't just a question about her intelligence. It was a continuation of the same pattern of disrespect and dismissal that had followed her for years. But this time Donald Trump wasn't going to let it slide. The room was dead silent after the reporter's question hung in the air. All eyes were on Donald Trump, waiting to see how he would react. The liberal reporter who had asked the question had a smug grin plastered across his face, clearly expecting some kind of outburst, some emotional response. He had cornered Trump's wife with an insult, and he was ready to enjoy the chaos that would surely follow. But what happened next? No one could have predicted it. Trump's gaze remained steady, his face expressionless. He didn't look angry, didn't raise his voice. In fact, he didn't even rush to respond. He took his time, letting the silence linger for a moment, as if he were carefully weighing his words. The crowd held its breath, unsure of what would come next. Finally, he cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone, his tone calm but firm. "Let me get this straight. You're questioning my wife's intelligence?" The reporter's grin faltered just a little. Trump wasn't flustered, he wasn't defensive, he wasn't even upset. Instead, he spoke with an air of authority, like someone who had long been used to people underestimating him. The reporter, who had expected a hot-headed response, seemed to stumble over his next words. He hesitated for a split second, unsure of how to continue. Trump, however, wasn't about to let him off the hook. He pressed on, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to fill the room. "I don't know if you've done your homework, but Melania Trump speaks 5 languages. Can you say the same?" The room shifted again. Some reporters shifted uncomfortably, and others couldn't help but smile at Trump's pointed remark. The reporter's smirk wavered. He wasn't expecting this kind of response, one grounded in facts and confidence. Trump didn't stop there. He continued, not giving the reporter a chance to recover. "Melania has spent years advocating for children's well-being. She's traveled the world, meeting with world leaders. And yet, you choose to question her intelligence." The reporter, still reeling from the unexpected challenge, opened his mouth, but no words came out. Trump leaned back slightly, his tone almost conversational. "What exactly have you done to make the world better?" the reporter stammered, but no one was listening to him anymore. Trump wasn't just defending his wife, he was dismantling the reporter's argument. "You hide behind your questions, trying to tear people down, but the real measure of a person isn't in what others say about them. It's in what they do. And Melania has done more in her time as First Lady than you've probably done in your entire career." The room was still as quiet as ever. Every reporter in the room, even the ones who had likely supported the reporter's stance, were now watching the confrontation unfold with wide eyes. They had expected a simple back and forth, a test of political rhetoric. But what they were witnessing was something far more powerful, a lesson in respect. Trump paused, letting the words hang in the air. The reporter's face was now red, his eyes darting between the audience and the First Lady's defender. But there was nothing he could say to undo what had just happened. He had lost the moment. Trump took a step back, allowing the silence to stretch just a little longer, watching the room, reading the reactions. It wasn't about the reporter anymore. It was about the message he was sending. "You know," Trump continued, his voice slightly softer now, "I don't expect everyone to like my wife, but what I do expect is respect. And if you can't give her that, then you've already lost the debate." With that, Trump glanced over at the reporter one last time, his eyes cold and determined. And then he turned his attention back to the rest of the room, as if to say, "This conversation is over." The reporter, still struggling to come up with a rebuttal, faltered and dropped his gaze. The once confident attitude had completely vanished. Trump's calm demeanor and precise response had left the reporter completely humiliated, and the rest of the press room felt the weight of the exchange. They had expected a battle, but what they got was a masterclass in handling criticism. Trump had not only defended his wife's honor, he had also taught everyone in that room a lesson on how to stand firm, no matter how unfair the attack. The silence in the room grew heavier as the tension reached its peak. The reporter, still caught off guard, tried to recover. But Trump's calm, measured tone made it clear this wasn't a moment for him to get rattled. This was a moment for him to teach, to take control of the narrative. Trump leaned forward again, his gaze unwavering, locking eyes with the reporter as he continued. You seem to think that Melania is just someone who walks around with a pretty face and a fancy title. But that's the problem with people like you. You judge without looking at the whole picture. The reporter was now defensively shifting his weight, his arrogance beginning to fade as he realized that Trump wasn't giving him an inch. His fingers trembled as he adjusted his glasses, trying to find his voice. You claim she's not involved, Trump continued, his voice growing a little firmer, but she's been more involved in the lives of children than most people could dream of. The Be Best campaign, helping children stay safe online, promoting kindness and fighting bullying. These are things that matter. She's made a difference in real lives while you sit behind a desk throwing insults. Trump's words hit their mark. The room, filled with reporters who had once been so eager to hear the critique, was now completely silent. The reporter's face flushed a deep red, but he wasn't about to back down. He opened his mouth, clearly attempting to speak over Trump, but was cut off instantly. You talk about intelligence, but what is intelligence if it's used to tear someone down? Trump asked, his voice cool and calculating. What have you contributed to the conversation? The reporter paused, a slight hesitation in his eyes, his confidence faltering with every word that Trump spoke. This wasn't the scenario he had envisioned. This wasn't the setup where he got to humiliate the Trump family and make headlines. Trump's gaze never wavered as he continued his onslaught. I've seen Melania speak with children who have been bullied. I've seen her visit hospitals, meet with leaders around the world. And yet, people like you want to mock her because she's not playing your media game. The reporter's eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out, but there was no escape. Trump's command of the situation was irrefutable. The more the reporter tried to speak, the more insignificant his words became. Trump took another step forward, his voice sharp as he lowered the boom. I know people like you, people who try to tear others down because they think it makes them look bigger. But in reality, it only exposes your own weakness. Melania has always acted with dignity, with grace, while you hide behind your questions. The reporters in the room exchanged nervous glances, unsure of whether they should react. But Trump wasn't done yet. He wasn't merely defending his wife anymore. He was putting the entire media's actions under the microscope. You want to talk about privilege? Let's talk about your privilege, Trump said, turning the conversation around. You sit in that seat and you think that because you have a microphone, you have the power to degrade others. But your privilege is not the privilege of truth. It's the privilege of being able to hide behind a screen while you tear down real people. The room was absolutely silent now. The energy in the space had shifted from anticipation to discomfort. The reporter, once so eager to provoke, now seemed small, cornered. Trump leaned back and smiled, his confidence surging. Let me make one thing clear for you, Trump said, his voice still smooth, but carrying a weight that was unmistakable. Melania Trump is far more intelligent, more influential, and more caring than you could ever understand. And I'll tell you this, if you ever want to try to tear her down again, you better think twice. The reporter opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His throat was dry, his face now a shade of crimson. He realized too late that his question had backfired in the worst possible way. Trump looked around the room, his eyes scanning the reporters, his gaze steady. So, to everyone who thinks Melania is just a pretty face, look again. He smiled, his voice almost playful now. She's doing more than any of us could ever imagine, while you sit there questioning her. I think we all know who's really making a difference here." The room broke into quiet applause, with a few reporters even nodding in approval. The reporter who had tried to humiliate Melania was left standing there, speechless, as Trump walked away from the podium, his mission complete. As he exited the stage, Trump glanced over his shoulder, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his lips. The media had underestimated him, but more importantly, they had underestimated Melania. And now they would have to reckon with it. The room, which had been buzzing with anticipation, suddenly went eerily silent. Trump's words had just landed, and the Liberal reporter stood there, stunned into silence, his face flushed with a mix of disbelief and embarrassment. He had come to the press conference hoping to embarrass the First Lady with a cutting remark, but instead he found himself on the receiving end of a verbal assault he never saw coming. The reporter shifted uncomfortably, his confident stance now replaced with nervous glances at the other journalists. He had nothing left to say. Trump had completely undone his attack, turning it back on him with ease, while exposing the hypocrisy of his question. The audience in the room was watching, some holding their breath, others trying to hide their smiles. The journalists were clearly divided. Some admired Trump's sharp response, while others shifted in their seats, unsure how to react. But one thing was clear: Trump had effectively silenced the room. The reporter, now looking defeated, tried to salvage the situation by looking to the moderator for support. But the moderator simply shrugged, clearly unwilling to step in. The other reporters, who had been waiting for a moment to join the conversation, now hesitated, unsure if they should challenge Trump or just let the moment stand. Trump, never one to leave things unresolved, took advantage of the awkward silence. With a small but confident smile, he continued to speak, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had just made their point clear. "I think it's pretty clear. Melania is far more than what some of you want her to be. She's a woman of substance, of action, not just some figurehead. And I won't stand by while anyone, especially the media, tries to tear her down." There was no response. The reporter had no rebuttal. The power dynamics of the room had completely shifted, and everyone in it knew it. Trump had not only defended his wife, but he had also taken the opportunity to call out the underlying bias in the media, something everyone had been too afraid to acknowledge openly. The reporter was left standing there, speechless and defeated. His original smugness was gone, replaced by a visibly flustered demeanor, as though he had just realized how badly his attempt to undermine Melania had backfired. He shuffled his notes, trying to regain some semblance of composure, but it was clear to everyone that he had just lost the battle. Trump's final words echoed in the silence. "You want to question intelligence? You better be ready to back it up, because Melania has proven herself far beyond anything any of you can comprehend." With that, Trump turned his attention to the next questioner, effectively ending the exchange. The reporter, now completely humiliated, slunk back into his seat, while the rest of the room watched in stunned silence, unsure of what had just transpired. Trump had done it again. He had turned a potential attack into a masterstroke of defense, leaving his opponent utterly humiliated. The tension in the press room lingered long after Trump's final words. The once boisterous chatter had completely died down, replaced by a heavy silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. Everyone knew that something had just shifted, not just in the conversation, but in the power dynamic of the room. Reporters glanced at each other, unsure how to react. Some were still processing the sheer boldness of Trump's words, while others were trying to stifle their smirks, realizing they had just witnessed a masterclass in defending one's family. But the Liberal reporter who had tried to undermine Melania was now sitting in his seat, his face flushed with a combination of embarrassment and frustration. He had walked into this press conference expecting to take a swing at the Trump family, But instead, he had just been completely outplayed. Trump, standing confidently at the podium, wasn't about to let the moment go unnoticed. He turned back to the crowd, his voice once again calm, but this time carrying the air of victory. "You know, the media loves to tear people down. They can't seem to find the respect that's due to anyone, especially my wife. But let's be clear, Melania will never back down, and neither will I." The room was now divided. Some reporters, who had been skeptical of Trump's ability to handle criticism, found themselves impressed by his response. Others were still shaking their heads, trying to figure out how a simple question had escalated into a public victory for Trump. But it wasn't just the reporters who were reacting. The cameras, which had been flashing non-stop, now seemed to take on a different energy. The narrative was no longer about Melania being a target, but about her defender, her husband, turning the tables. The press room, once buzzing with energy, now felt like a powder keg waiting to explode. Trump, reading the atmosphere, decided to press the advantage. This is what the media does, folks. They try to attack people, tear them down. But in the end, the truth always comes out. My wife doesn't need to prove herself to anyone. She's already proven her worth through action, through her work. The question is, why don't the rest of you? There was a moment of awkward stillness before one of the reporters, sitting near the back, raised their hand. "Mr. Trump, with all due respect, are you saying that the press should just stop asking tough questions?" Trump turned his gaze toward the reporter, his expression thoughtful, but still confident. "No, I'm saying that the press should ask questions that matter, ask about real issues, real solutions. Instead of focusing on petty personal attacks, why not ask about policy, about what really makes a difference? But you'd rather tear down a woman who's trying to make the world a better place, wouldn't you?" A few audible gasps rippled through the room. The reporter's question, which had seemed innocent enough, had been flipped on its head and used to remind everyone of the deeper issue at hand, the constant media obsession with trivializing Melania's role. The press room was in an uproar now. Some reporters started scribbling in their notebooks furiously, while others leaned back in their seats, shaking their heads in disbelief. Trump had done the unthinkable. He had turned the tables so completely that the narrative no longer belonged to the reporter. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed. The energy in the room had shifted, and everyone in it was witnessing something that felt undeniably powerful. Trump had not only defended his wife, but he had reclaimed the space in a way that left no room for rebuttal. As he prepared to move on to the next question, Trump looked around the room one last time, his eyes scanning the reporters who had once eagerly awaited the chance to challenge him. They had all been served a lesson, and there was no escaping it. "Now, that's how you handle a question, folks," Trump added with a smile, his voice dripping with quiet satisfaction. The room was silent once more, but this time it wasn't filled with tension. It was filled with the aftershock of what had just transpired. The reporter who had tried to tear Melania down now sat with his head down, the weight of the moment bearing down on him. His attempted attack had been thwarted, his credibility shattered, and in its place stood a lesson in honor and respect. As Trump moved on to the next question, it was clear. The press room had just experienced a pivotal moment. Within hours of the press conference, the clip of Trump's powerful defense of Melania began to spread like wildfire across the internet. Social media was buzzing, and the story quickly dominated the news cycle, with people from all walks of life sharing their thoughts. Some hailed it as a victory for the First Lady, while others acknowledged the brilliance of Trump's response. On Twitter, hashtags like #Trump takes no prisoners and #Melania deserves respect began trending. Thousands of tweets poured in, many celebrating Trump's handling of the situation. Finally, someone standing up for Melania in the face of this endless media bias, one tweet read, followed by a wave of retweets and likes. Some reporters who had been present at the conference shared their own reactions. A few were grudgingly impressed by Trump's ability to shut down the attack without losing his cool. "Say what you will about him, but he knows how to fight for his family," one veteran political correspondent tweeted. But not everyone was so receptive to Trump's words. There were plenty of critics too. News outlets with a more liberal slant quickly posted op-eds criticizing Trump for what they perceived as a distraction from the real issues. Trump's defensive outburst was just a diversion from addressing his own policies, one headline read. But even these articles couldn't escape the growing conversation. For every critic, there were a dozen supporters pointing out the obvious. Trump had turned a negative question into an opportunity to defend his wife, and by extension, his family's honor. The response from Trump supporters was fierce. In forums and comment sections, people praised the president for his swift justice and for standing up for someone who had been unfairly attacked for so long. "Melania didn't deserve the hate," one commenter wrote. "She's done more than anyone to raise awareness for children's issues." Even those who didn't necessarily support Trump politically couldn't help but admit his defense of his wife was compelling. On Facebook, where the video of Trump's fiery response was shared millions of times, the conversation grew even more heated. Some people pointed out that Trump's defense of Melania wasn't just about family loyalty, but a direct rebuke to the media's ongoing agenda. "Enough is enough," one post said. "How many times does Melania have to prove herself before people respect her? She's more than just a pretty face." The post quickly gathered thousands of reactions and sparked debates in the comment sections. A few conservative news networks even began dedicating segments to discussing how Trump had won the day. Trump stood his ground, and in doing so showed the world that family comes first, one Fox News anchor said during an afternoon broadcast. But the real shift came when Melania herself took to social media. After the conference, she posted a simple yet powerful message on Twitter. "Thank you, my love. I could be best." The tweet went viral almost immediately. People from across the political spectrum were touched by the unity and the support shown between the two. It wasn't just about a spouse defending another. It was about standing up against an unfair narrative that had existed for far too long. Melania's voice, in this moment, was one of quiet strength, and it resonated with people who had previously overlooked her efforts. While the media tried to shift the narrative back to attacking the president's policies, the conversation had already moved on. Melania's name was now trending, but not for the reasons the media had hoped. She was no longer the target. She had become a symbol of resilience and dignity. The damage done to the liberal reporter's credibility was evident as well. A few hours after the press conference, his name was trending, not because of any successful reporting, but because he had been thoroughly humbled in front of the world. His colleagues began circulating the video, mocking him for the failed confrontation. "That reporter never stood a chance," one comment read. Even his usual supporters were quietly backing away. For Trump, this moment was not just about defending Melania, it was about sending a broader message about family loyalty, respect, and standing firm in the face of unfairness. The public saw it, the media saw it, and in the end, the message resonated louder than anything else.